I never thought the hands I once held in the delivery room, tiny, wrinkled, perfect, would one day shove me into my own kitchen wall, hard enough to crack the drywall. But they did, and I remember thinking, as I slid down to the floor, with the wind knocked out of me and my hip screaming in pain, that I had somehow loved my daughter into a monster. Her name is Heather. She's 34 years old, and she has her mother's eyes. That particular shade of gray-green that used to make me feel like everything in the world was going to be fine. Her mother, Carol, passed away 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held Carol's hand every single day of those 14 months, and when she was gone, I made her a promise. I told her I would take care of Heather. I told her our daughter would be okay. I spent the last 11 years wondering if I misunderstood what okay was supposed to look like. Let me go back a little. I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a pipefitter for a contractor out of Hamilton, Ontario. Not glamorous work, cold in the winter, brutal in the summer, the kind of job that leaves its fingerprints on your body permanently, a shoulder that clicks every time I reach overhead, a lower back that forecasts rain better than the weather network. But it was honest work, and it paid well, and when I retired 2 years ago, I had a modest pension, a paid-off house in Stoney Creek, and just over $220,000 in RRSPs and savings. Nothing extravagant, but enough to be comfortable. Enough that I didn't have to worry. Carol and I had always planned to leave whatever was left to Heather when we were gone. We talked about it openly. She knew roughly what to expect someday. Someday being the operative word. After Carol died, I watched Heather grieve, and I grieved alongside her. She moved in with me for about 6 months. She was 23, just finished her business degree at McMaster, and we leaned on each other the way people do when they both lost the same person. Those 6 months were some of the most painful of my life, but also some of the most genuine. It was just the two of us, making dinner, watching old movies Carol loved, crying when we needed to. I thought we were close. I believed that. Then she met Brandon. Brandon came into the picture about 2 years after Carol passed. He works in finance, or did, anyway, at a wealth management firm in Mississauga. Sharp dresser. Confident handshake. The kind of man who quotes his own salary in casual conversation and somehow makes it sound accidental. I tried to like him. I genuinely tried. But there was something about the way he looked at my house, at my furniture, at my truck, that made me feel like he was doing long division in his head. They got engaged 4 years ago. I gave Heather her mother's ring to use if she wanted. She said it was beautiful and she would be honored. Then 3 weeks later she told me Brandon's mother thought it was a little dated, and they'd decided to get something new. I didn't say anything. I just went home and put the ring back in the box in my dresser and didn't touch it for a long time. The wedding was lovely, I'll give them that. They got married at a vineyard outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I paid for a significant portion of it, around $18,000, because Heather asked me to, and because she was my daughter, and because Carol wasn't there to see it, and I wanted to do something that felt like honoring both of them. Brandon's parents contributed as well, though I later found out they gave considerably less than I did, a fact Brandon apparently never corrected when he told people otherwise. After the wedding, they bought a condo in Burlington. A nice one, 1,200 square feet, good building, close to the GO train. I helped them with the down payment, another $15,000. Again, I didn't hesitate. I told myself this was what parents did. This was what Carol would have wanted. The problem with always saying yes is that people stop hearing the word no when you finally use it. About 14 months ago, Heather and Brandon sat me down at my kitchen table. I remember it was a Sunday in late September. I'd made roast chicken, Carol's recipe, the one with the lemon and the herbs under the skin, and I thought they were coming over for a nice dinner. They ate the whole meal first. That part I still think about sometimes. They ate the whole meal, complimented the chicken, had seconds, and then, when I got up to clear the plates, Heather said, "Dad, sit down. We need to talk to you about something." They wanted to buy a house. Not the condo. They'd sell the condo. A real house, they said, with a yard. Because they were thinking about starting a family, and a condo wasn't the right place to raise a child. I told them that sounded like a wonderful plan. I meant it. I was excited about the idea of a grandchild. I'd been quietly hoping. Then Brandon put a folder on the table. Inside was a printout, a real estate listing for a detached home in Oakville. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, double garage. The asking price was $1.1 million. I looked at the listing for a long time without saying anything. Brandon explained that with what they'd net from the condo sale and their own savings, they were about $90,000 short of what the bank required for the mortgage they wanted. He said they'd looked at the numbers carefully. He said he knew I had savings. He said the inheritance would come to Heather eventually anyway. He actually used that phrase, come to Heather eventually anyway, as if we were just rearranging a timeline. Not as if he was sitting in my kitchen asking me for $90,000 of my retirement savings. I put the listing down. I said, I can't do that. Heather's face changed instantly, not to sadness, not even to disappointment, to something harder than either of those things. What do you mean you can't? She said. I told her I had $220,000. That sounded like a lot, but it was everything. It had to last me potentially another 25 or 30 years. I had the pension, yes. But between property taxes on the house, vehicle costs, medications that were increasing every year, and the basic reality of getting older, I could not give away $90,000 and feel secure about my future. I told her I would be happy to give her $20,000, a meaningful gift, freely given, with no strings, but 90 was simply not something I could do. Brandon leaned back in his chair. 20,000, he said, in a tone that suggested I'd offered him a coupon. Brandon, Heather said, and I thought she was going to redirect him, bring some reasonableness back into the room. But she looked at me and said, Dad, you worked for 30 years. The house is paid off. What exactly are you saving it for? I told her I was saving it to live on. I told her I was 62 years old and not in perfect health, and I didn't know what the next decade was going to look like, and I needed that cushion. I told her that when I was gone, whatever was left would be hers. But I couldn't give it away while I still needed it. She said, You've given money to charity before. You donate every year. You gave $3,000 to that food bank in Dundas during COVID. I stared at her. I said, That's not the same thing. Why not? You had money to give to strangers. Brandon said, very quietly, as if he was just thinking out loud, He probably has more set aside than he's letting on. The room went very still. I looked at my son-in-law and I asked him what he meant by that. He shrugged. He said it wasn't an accusation. He said he just knew how people of my generation thought about money, how people didn't always like to show all their cards. He said it in this measured, reasonable, financial advisor voice that made it somehow worse than if he just said it plainly. I told him I had shown him everything he needed to see. I told him the conversation was over. I asked them to leave. Heather stood up and she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She said, Mom would have wanted you to help us. I had to grab the edge of the table. I told her very quietly that she was not permitted to speak for her mother. I told her Carol worked and sacrificed alongside me for 30 years to build what we had, and she did not do that so that we could hand it away to an Oakville real estate market, and that if she believed otherwise, she hadn't known her mother as well as she thought she did. Heather picked up her purse. Brandon picked up his folder. And on the way out, my daughter said, Don't call me until you've thought about this more seriously. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The roast pan was still on the stove. I turned off the light over the table and I sat down in the dark and I thought about Carol, and about the 11 years since she'd been gone, and about all the ways I had tried to do right by the promise I made her. 2 weeks passed. I didn't call. Heather didn't call. Then one evening, a Thursday, I heard a car in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Brandon's Audi. Then another car pulled up. I didn't recognize it. A woman got out. I'd met Brandon's mother, Sylvia, twice at the wedding and at Christmas 2 years ago. This was not Sylvia. This was a woman maybe 10 years younger than me, well-dressed, with the kind of purposeful walk that people get when they've decided something in advance. Heather rang my doorbell. I opened the door. She said, Dad, this is Renata. She's a financial advisor. We just want you to hear what she has to say." I understood immediately what was happening. They had brought someone to my home unannounced to tell me my own financial situation, to make the case with professional authority that I had enough money to give them $90,000. I told them I was not interested. Brandon said from the porch, behind the two women, "We're just asking you to listen." I told them that I had been clear about my decision, that bringing a stranger to my door to pressure me had not changed my decision, and that I would like them to leave. What happened next happened very fast. Brandon stepped forward. He put his hand against my front door, the one I was in the process of closing, and he held it open. He was not violent, not yet, but there was a physicality to it that I wasn't prepared for. He was in my doorway, in my house, and his voice had dropped and he said, very close to my face, "You're being completely unreasonable. This is Heather's inheritance. You're withholding what's already hers." I said, "Get your hand off my door." He said, "Not until you agree to at least hear Renata out." And then Heather said, and I want to be careful here, I want to say exactly what she said. She said, "Dad, if you keep being this selfish, we're done. I won't bring your grandchildren here. You won't see them. Is that what you want?" There are moments when you hear something, and you know, in real time, that it is changing you. Not slowly the way most change happens, but immediately and permanently. This was one of those moments. I looked at my daughter. I thought about Carol. I thought about the delivery room, the tiny hands, every school concert and every skinned knee, and the 6 months after the funeral when we ate cereal for dinner sometimes because neither of us had the energy to cook properly, and I just held her. And then I stepped back, reached past Brandon's hand, and I closed the door. I locked it. I heard voices on the porch for a few minutes. Then the cars left. What I did next was not something I planned. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been someone who made gestures. But I walked to my home office, and I opened my laptop, and I called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia. No, I should say, a woman I'll call my legal counsel to keep things private, and I left her a message asking her to call me as soon as she could. What I also did, which I will come to in a moment, was something I had actually done 3 months earlier, for an entirely different reason. 6 months before all of this, I'd had a break-in. Nothing serious. Someone had tried the back door and rattled some windows, probably kids or someone looking for tools in the garage. I'd mentioned it to my neighbor, a retired police officer named Douglas, and he had helped me install a security camera system. 3 cameras, one at the front door, one at the back, one covering the driveway. The footage stored automatically to a device in my office closet. I'd completely forgotten about those cameras until I sat down at my desk that Thursday night. I pulled up the footage. The front door camera had captured everything. Brandon's hand on the door, his face close to mine, Heather's exact words about the grandchildren, Renata standing on my porch as a third party to the whole encounter. All of it. Timestamp, audio, clear as anything. I called Douglas the next morning and told him what had happened. He came over, watched the footage with me, and didn't say much for a while. Then he said, "That's a credible intimidation incident on video. You should speak to a lawyer and possibly report it." I did speak to my lawyer. She reviewed the footage and told me the same thing, that what Brandon had done with the door constituted a form of physical intimidation, and that Heather's threat to withhold access to future grandchildren could be characterized as coercive in the context of a financial demand. She advised me to document everything, change my locks, and update my will. I updated my will the following week. I won't share the specific details, but I will say that $90,000 of my estate now goes to the Jurabinski Cancer Center in Hamilton in Carol's name. It's the hospital where my wife received her treatment. It seemed right. The locks were changed. I also told Douglas to keep an eye on the property. Heather called me 3 weeks later, not to apologize, to ask if I had come around. She said it in a voice so casual that for a moment I genuinely wondered if she remembered what had happened at my door. I told her I had not come around. I told her that her husband had put his hand on my door to prevent me from closing it in my own home, and that she had threatened to keep future grandchildren from me as a financial negotiation tactic, and that I had it all on camera. The silence on her end of the line lasted almost 10 seconds. She said, "You recorded us?" I said the cameras were installed months before and were permanent. I said I hadn't installed them in anticipation of this. I said it didn't really matter. The footage existed and I had it. She said she needed to talk to Brandon. I said, "Take all the time you need." Brandon called my lawyer's office 2 days later. Apparently, he had consulted someone of his own, a lawyer friend, I assume, and had been told that the footage combined with the documented financial demands created a situation he did not want to escalate. My lawyer told me he had been advised to let the matter drop. He did not apologize either. I want to be honest about that. No one apologized. What came, about 6 weeks after all of this, was a card in the mail. A card, like you'd buy at Shoppers. Heather's handwriting. It said she was sorry things had gotten so heated and that she hoped we could find a way to move forward. There was no acknowledgement of what specifically had happened. There was no acknowledgement that asking a retired man on a fixed income for $90,000, as if it were a reasonable transaction, might have been wrong. There was just the word heated, doing an enormous amount of work. I put the card on my kitchen table and looked at it for a couple of days. Then I wrote back. I wrote a real letter by hand, the way I used to write things before email existed. 4 pages. I told Heather that I loved her. I told her I would always love her. I told her that no amount of hurt or anger or disappointment would change that, and that if she genuinely wanted a relationship with me, that door was open. But I told her that door had a condition. I would not be treated as a financial resource. I would not be pressured in my own home. And if Brandon ever again placed his hand on anything of mine to prevent me from doing what I had every right to do, I would file a formal report, not as a threat, as a fact. I also told her that her mother would not have wanted what happened at that door, not the version Brandon staged and not the version Heather participated in. I told her I had thought about it carefully, and I believed that with my whole chest. I sent the letter by registered mail so I'd know it was received. She called me 2 weeks after that. She was crying. It was the first time in this whole ordeal that she sounded like the person I raised, like the 23-year-old who sat across from me eating cereal and crying because her mother was gone and the world felt too big and too empty. She said she knew it had gone too far. She said Brandon had pushed her to push me, and she had let him because she wanted the house, and she hadn't stopped to think about what she was doing to get it. She said she was sorry, specifically sorry, not just sorry that things got heated. I accepted the apology. I want to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean everything is fine. It doesn't mean we're back to Sunday dinners and everything is normal. It means I accepted it, the way you accept that something has happened, and you choose to move forward anyway, because the alternative, the complete severance, the permanent silence, is a grief I've already lived once and I don't want to live again. Brandon and I have not spoken. I don't know if we will. That's a longer road. What I do know is this. The house in my name is still in my name. The savings are still in my account. The cameras are still on the property. And in Hamilton, at the cancer center where my wife spent the last months of her life, there will one day be a contribution made in her name, and nobody's pressure or manipulation or financial advisor brought to my doorstep changed that. Carol worked hard. I worked hard. We built something together across 35 years of winters and overtime and scrimping and choosing. It belongs to us. It will go where we decide it goes. I am 63 years old. I have a clicking shoulder and a bad back and a house that's a little too quiet most evenings. But I am not confused about who I am or what I'm owed or what I owe. That's not nothing. In fact, some days it feels like everything. There's a moment I keep coming back to even now. It's not the sound of Brandon's hand hitting my front door, and it's not Heather's voice saying the word grandchildren like it was a bargaining chip. It's the roast chicken going cold on the stove. Carol's recipe, the one with the lemon and the herbs. They ate the whole meal first. I think about that a lot, because it tells you everything about how people justify things to themselves. They needed to eat first. They needed to feel like it was a normal Sunday. And then, only when the plates were cleared, did they put the folder on the table, as if the warmth of a shared meal could soften what they were about to ask. as if I wouldn't notice. What I've come to understand, and it took me a while to get here, because understanding something and accepting it are two different speeds, is that people reveal their character not in the big dramatic moments, but in the small calculations. Brandon didn't show me who he was when he blocked my door. He showed me who he was when he said, "Come to Heather eventually anyway," like my life was just an inconvenient delay between now and his inheritance. That sentence told me more than anything that followed. And Heather. My Heather. I've spent a lot of time sitting with the fact that she let it happen. Not that she was the one who put her hand on the door. She wasn't. But she stood there. She brought the financial advisor. She said what she said about the grandchildren. She made the choice, in real time, to use the thing she knew would hurt me most. That's not something Brandon made her do. That was her. The cameras saved me, yes, but what actually saved me was knowing who I was and what I was willing to accept. The footage was evidence. My own clarity was the foundation. I've seen people in situations like mine who didn't have that clarity, who kept second-guessing themselves, kept thinking maybe they were being unreasonable, kept measuring their love by how much they were willing to give away. That kind of self-doubt is what people like Brandon count on. He sat across from me and told me I probably had more than I was letting on, and he said it in a calm voice specifically because he expected me to absorb it, to internalize it, to start wondering if he was right. I didn't. Not because I'm unusually strong, but because Carol and I built something real across 35 years and I knew exactly what it was worth and what it cost us. Knowing that, really knowing it, not just as a number but as 31 winters of pipe fitting and every double shift and every year we didn't take a vacation so we could put more away, that knowing is its own kind of armor. What I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in what happened to me, the most important thing you can do is stay honest about what you actually know to be true. Not what someone is pressuring you to believe. Not what someone is pressuring you to believe. Not what feels easier to accept. What you actually know. That's not stubbornness. That's the thing that keeps you standing when someone puts their hand on your door. Heather called eventually. She cried. She said she was sorry and she meant it, or at least part of her meant it. The part that remembered who she was before she let someone else's ambition become her own. I accepted it, not because it undid anything, but because cutting her off completely would have been its own kind of defeat. And because somewhere in her there is still the 23-year-old who ate cereal for dinner with me and cried for her mother, and didn't ask for anything except to not be alone. I'm keeping the house, I'm keeping the savings, and in Hamilton, when I'm gone, Carol's name will be on something that helped people survive. That's what we worked for. That's where it goes.